A Thoroughly Ordinary History of the United States. This script presents a calm, methodical, and intentionally uneventful overview of the history of the United States of America. It is written in a neutral and restrained tone and follows events in a straightforward chronological order. The purpose of this script is not to entertain, dramatize, or persuade, but simply to explain historical developments in a clear and conventional manner. The language is plain, the pacing is steady, and the focus remains on commonly accepted historical facts as they are typically presented in standard educational materials. The history of the United States did not begin with independence. It developed over long periods of time through human settlement, economic activity, political experimentation, and international conflict. Geography, natural resources, and population movement all played important roles. This script begins with indigenous societies before European contact and continues through colonization, independence, expansion, industrialization, and into the early 21st century. Each section provides general information without emphasis on dramatic interpretation. Indigenous peoples before European contact. Long before European explorers arrived in North America, the continent was inhabited by millions of indigenous peoples. These populations were organized into hundreds of distinct groups, each with its own language, traditions, and social structures. Indigenous societies adapted to their local environments and developed economic systems based on hunting, fishing, agriculture, or combinations of these activities. In the eastern woodlands, many tribes practiced farming and lived in permanent or semi-permanent villages. Crops such as corn, beans, and squash formed the basis of their diets. In the Great Plains, nomadic groups followed buffalo herds and relied heavily on hunting. In the Southwest, Pueblo societies built stone and adobe structures and developed irrigation systems. Along the Pacific Northwest coast, abundant natural resources supported large populations with complex social hierarchies. Indigenous peoples engaged in trade across wide regions. Goods such as copper, shells, tools, and food items were exchanged along established routes. Political leadership varied from group to group and could include councils, hereditary leaders, or other forms of governance. This long period of indigenous history shaped the human presence on the continent before sustained European involvement began. European exploration and early contact. European exploration of the Americas began in the late 15th century. In 1492, Christopher Columbus reached the Caribbean under the sponsorship of Spain. His voyages led to continued contact between Europe and the Western Hemisphere. Spain, France, England, and other European powers sought territory, trade routes, and resources. Spanish explorers traveled through parts of the Caribbean, Florida, and the southwestern regions of what would later become the United States. French explorers moved through the Mississippi River Basin and parts of Canada. English efforts focused largely on the Atlantic coast. Early encounters between Europeans and indigenous peoples involved trade, cooperation, misunderstanding, and conflict. European diseases such as smallpox had devastating effects on indigenous populations who lacked immunity. Population decline disrupted social systems and weakened resistance to colonization. Over time, European presence expanded and permanent settlements were established. The English colonies. The first permanent English settlement in North America was Jamestown, founded in 1607 in present-day Virginia. Early settlers faced challenges including disease, food shortages, and strained relations with local tribes. Survival depended on a combination of assistance from indigenous peoples and supply shipments from England. Additional English colonies were founded along the Atlantic coast during the 17th century. Massachusetts Bay was established by Puritans seeking religious freedom. Pennsylvania was founded as a place of tolerance under William Penn. Georgia began as a colony intended partly for economic opportunity and partly for defense. Colonial economies varied by region. New England focused on small-scale farming, fishing, and trade. The middle colonies produced grain and supported commerce. The southern colonies relied heavily on plantation agriculture, producing crops such as tobacco, rice, and later cotton. Enslaved Africans were brought to provide labor, creating a system of slavery that became deeply entrenched. Colonial government and society. Colonial governments operated under charters granted by the English Crown. Many colonies had elected assemblies, though political participation was limited. Voting rights were generally restricted to property-owning white men. Governors were often appointed by the Crown or by colonial proprietors. Daily life in the colonies was shaped by work, religion, and family obligations. Most people lived in rural areas and worked in agriculture. Education was limited, though literacy rates were relatively high in New England due to religious emphasis on reading scripture. Social hierarchy was influenced by wealth, land ownership, and race. Over time, colonists developed local identities and expectations of self-governance. While loyalty to Britain remained common, differences in interests and priorities gradually increased. Tensions with Britain. Following the French and Indian War, which ended in 1663, Britain faced substantial debt. To raise revenue, Parliament imposed taxes on the American colonies. Measures such as the Stamp Act and Townshend Acts were met with resistance. Colonists argued that they should not be taxed without representation in Parliament. Protests, boycotts, and political organizing increased. The Boston Tea Party in 1773 was a notable act of resistance. Britain responded with punitive laws known as the Intolerable Acts. Colonial leaders convened meetings to coordinate responses. The First and Second Continental Congresses discussed grievances and potential actions. Armed conflict began in 1775 with fighting at Lexington and Concord. The American Revolution. The American Revolutionary War lasted from 1775 to 1783. The colonies formed the Continental Army under the leadership of George Washington. Early military engagements produced mixed results. The conflict continued over several years with varying levels of intensity. In July 1776, representatives adopted the Declaration of Independence. The document outlined philosophical principles and listed grievances against British rule. Despite the declaration, the war continued. French support played a significant role in the eventual outcome. The conflict ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which recognized American independence. The Articles of Confederation. After independence, the states operated under the Articles of Confederation. This system created a weak central government. Congress lacked the power to tax, regulate trade effectively, or enforce laws. These limitations became increasingly problematic. Economic difficulties and internal unrest highlighted weaknesses. Leaders concluded that reform was necessary. The Constitution and federal government. In 1787, delegates met in Philadelphia to revise the Articles. Instead, they drafted a new constitution. The Constitution established a federal system with 3 branches of government. The document was debated and eventually ratified in 1788. The Bill of Rights was added to protect individual liberties. This framework continues to guide the government today. Early national development. George Washington became the first president in 1789. His administration established precedents for governance. Political parties soon formed, reflecting differing views on federal power. The nation expanded westward. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 significantly increased territory. Settlement brought economic growth and conflict with Native American tribes. Slavery and sectional differences. Slavery remained a central issue. Southern states relied on enslaved labor, while northern states industrialized. Compromises attempted to manage tensions. Despite these efforts, disagreements persisted and intensified over time. The Civil War. Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860 prompted secession by Southern states. The Civil War began in 1861. The conflict lasted 4 years and resulted in significant loss of life. The Union victory in 1865 preserved the nation. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. Reconstruction followed. Industrial growth and immigration. The late 19th century saw rapid industrialization. Railroads expanded, and factories increased output. Immigration rose significantly. Cities grew, and labor movements emerged. The 20th century. The United States entered World War I in 1917. Economic challenges followed during the Great Depression. World War II began in 1939. The United States joined in 1941. After 1945, the nation emerged as a global power. The Cold War shaped foreign and domestic policy. Civil rights reforms addressed segregation and discrimination. The modern era. Technological change transformed society. Political debates and economic adjustments continued. The constitutional system remained in place as the nation addressed new challenges. Conclusion. This script has provided a deliberately plain and methodical overview of the United States history. It has avoided emotional emphasis and dramatic language. The history of the United States continues, shaped by its past and ongoing decisions.